The freezing wind howled through the desolate mountain pass, carrying with it the bitter sting of an incoming blizzard. Officer Sarah gripped the steering wheel of her cruiser, her knuckles white as the tires crunched over patches of black ice. The road was a forgotten ribbon of asphalt winding through a dense, unforgiving wilderness, miles away from any town or cellular tower. It was the kind of isolation that played tricks on the mind as the twilight deepened into a suffocating darkness. Her headlights cut through the swirling mist, revealing nothing but towering pines and jagged rocks. But then, a sudden anomaly broke the monotonous landscape. Something was on the road. Sarah slammed on the brakes, the heavy cruiser skidding slightly before coming to a jarring halt. The tires hissed against the freezing pavement. A thick cloud of exhaust plumed into the frigid air. Through the rain-streaked windshield, illuminated by the harsh glare of her high beams, sat a tiny, trembling shadow. At first glance, her mind tried to rationalize the shape. A stray dog abandoned in the wilderness. A bear cub separated from its mother. But as she squinted through the glass, the silhouette defied all logic. It possessed rounded shoulders, a distinctively shaped head, and long, delicate arms wrapped tightly around its own torso in a desperate attempt to conserve body heat. The impossible truth settled over her like a heavy blanket. It was a baby gorilla. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She grabbed her heavy winter coat and her heavy-duty flashlight, stepping out of the warm sanctuary of her vehicle and into the biting cold. The wind immediately whipped at her face, stealing her breath. She left the cruiser idling, the red and blue emergency lights painting the surrounding trees in rhythmic, ghostly flashes. The gravel crunched loudly beneath her heavy-duty boots as she took slow, measured steps toward the tiny creature. She kept her posture low, her hands visible, acutely aware that wild animals in distress could be unpredictable. But this creature did not run. It did not bare its teeth or let out a cry of warning. Instead, as Sarah closed the distance, the baby gorilla slowly lifted its head. The beam of her flashlight caught a pair of deep amber eyes filled with an overwhelming, almost human sorrow. The baby was covered in dirt and shivering violently, its sparse dark hair offering zero protection against the sub-zero temperatures of the mountain pass. It looked up at the officer not with the primal fear of a wild beast, but with the desperate, pleading gaze of a lost child begging for salvation. In that frozen moment on an empty mountain road, an unspoken bond was forged across the boundaries of species, a testament to the universal language of empathy and survival. If witnessing this incredible display of animal resilience and human compassion touches your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel to join our mission of sharing the wild's greatest miracles and uncovering the unbelievable stories of those who cannot speak for themselves. Now back to the freezing storm and a night that was about to turn incredibly dangerous. Sarah knelt slowly on the freezing asphalt, the cold seeping instantly through the fabric of her uniform pants. She extended a trembling hand, palm up, offering a silent gesture of peace. The baby gorilla hesitated for a fraction of a second before extending its own tiny, leathery hand. Its fingers wrapped around Sarah's index finger with a surprising, desperate strength. The touch was electric, a profound connection that shattered the reality of the desolate environment. The baby let out a soft, whimpering sound, a fragile vibration that cut straight through the howling wind. Sarah reached out with her other hand and gently scooped the shivering infant into her arms. The creature immediately buried its face into the thick fabric of her police jacket, seeking the warmth of her body. As she held the unexpected burden, her police instincts kicked in, cutting through the emotional shock of the encounter. Gorillas do not exist in these freezing mountains. They belong in the dense, humid rainforests of Africa, thousands of miles away from this icy purgatory. The presence of this infant was not a random act of nature. It was a glaring, terrifying anomaly that pointed to something deeply sinister. She stood up, shielding the baby from the wind, and cast her flashlight beam around the perimeter of the road. The beam swept across the cracked pavement and stopped at the edge of a steep embankment. There, carved deeply into the muddy shoulder of the road, were massive, aggressive tire tracks. They were fresh, the mud still slick and unfrozen, indicating a heavy vehicle had violently swerved off the designated path. Sarah carefully walked toward the edge, her boots slipping slightly on the wet grass, holding the baby securely against her chest. She pointed the beam of light down into the jagged ravine. Through the thick tangle of broken branches and shattered pine trees, she saw the dull gleam of twisted metal. A large, unmarked box truck lay on its side at the bottom of the gorge, its undercarriage exposed like the ribs of a fallen beast. The pungent, sickening smell of diesel fuel wafted up from the wreckage, mixing with the scent of pine and freezing rain. But it was not just the smell of fuel that hit her. It was the unmistakable, musky odor of wild animals. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces violently snapped together in her mind. This was not a commercial delivery truck. It was a mobile prison. She had stumbled upon the aftermath of a catastrophic accident involving the black market exotic animal trade. A highly organized, ruthless network of smugglers using the abandoned logging roads to bypass highway way stations and law enforcement checkpoints. The baby gorilla whimpered again, clutching tighter to her uniform lapel. Sarah looked down at the fragile life in her arms, suddenly realizing the horrific ordeal this creature had just survived. This infant had been stolen from its mother, ripped from the only home it had ever known, and thrust into a terrifying world of metal cages and darkness. It had endured a long, agonizing journey across continents, locked in a freezing, suffocating truck, treated as nothing more than a highly lucrative commodity by poachers who valued money over life. The accident must have violently thrown the truck off the road, tearing the cargo hold apart. In the chaos of the crash, the shattered metal must have provided a tiny, momentary window of escape. Driven by pure, blinding instinct, the baby gorilla had managed to squeeze through the wreckage and crawl its way up the steep, unforgiving embankment, desperately seeking any sign of life, any sign of warmth in a cold and alien world. It had crawled toward the only light it saw, the headlights of Sarah's approaching cruiser. It was a 1,000,000 to 1 chance of survival, a miracle born out of a nightmare. But Sarah knew that miracles in the wilderness often came with a heavy price. She retreated from the edge of the ravine and hurried back to her idling police cruiser. She opened the passenger door and gently placed the baby gorilla onto the seat, wrapping her heavy winter coat securely around its trembling body. She turned the vehicle's heater up to its maximum setting, the vents blasting warm air into the cabin. The baby curled into a tight ball within the folds of the jacket, its large amber eyes watching her every move with a mix of exhaustion and absolute trust. Sarah slid into the driver's seat and immediately grabbed her radio microphone. She pressed the transmission button, praying for the familiar crackle of the dispatcher's voice. She called for emergency backup, a rescue team, and animal control. She spoke clearly into the microphone, detailing her location and the unbelievable nature of her discovery. But the only response she received was a wall of harsh, unforgiving static. The thick storm clouds and the towering mountain peaks were blocking the signal entirely. She grabbed her cell phone from the center console. No service, not even a single bar. She was completely, terrifyingly alone. Just a lone officer and a highly prized, stolen baby gorilla stranded on a deserted mountain pass as a blizzard began to dump heavy snow onto the windshield. The realization of her isolation settled in, a cold dread washing over her. She could not leave the baby here, and she could not simply wait for a rescue that was not coming. She looked over at the passenger seat. The baby had uncurled slightly, its dark fingers reaching out from beneath the coat to touch the shiny metal of the laptop mounted between the seats. It was curious, resilient, and utterly dependent on her for its continued existence. Sarah reached over and gently stroked the top of its head, feeling the coarse texture of its hair and the warmth of its skin. The gorilla leaned into her touch, letting out a soft, rumbling sound that vibrated through the silent cabin of the cruiser. It was a purr of sorts, a primal expression of comfort and safety. In that confined space, surrounded by the hostile elements of the freezing mountain, Sarah made a silent vow. She would not let this creature become a victim of the cruel trade that had stolen it. She would protect it with her life. The baby had already fought so hard to survive against impossible odds, and she was going to make sure that fight was not in vain. They were a team now, bound together by a twist of fate on this lonely stretch of highway. She began to mentally calculate her options. She could try to drive back down the mountain, but the ice on the road was thickening by the minute, and the treacherous curves were notoriously dangerous even in broad daylight. If she slipped and crashed, there would be no one to find them until the spring thaw. The safest option seemed to be to wait out the worst of the storm in the heated vehicle and try the radio again when the clouds broke. She leaned back against the headrest, keeping one hand resting gently on the bundle of coats on the passenger seat. The rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers sweeping away the heavy snow provided a hypnotic, almost calming soundtrack to the tense situation. But the fragile illusion of safety was shattered in an instant. Over the hum of the cruiser's engine and the howling of the wind, Sarah's trained ears picked up a new, distinct sound. It was the low, aggressive rumble of a heavy-duty engine grinding in low gear. It was not the high-pitched whine of a civilian car, but the guttural roar of a massive, customized off-road truck slowly crawling its way up the mountain road. Sarah immediately sat up straight, her eyes straining to see through the snow-covered rear windshield. In the distance, cutting through the dense darkness of the forest, she saw the sweeping beams of high-intensity off-road lights. They were swaying side to side, systematically illuminating the trees and the edge of the road. Someone was coming, and they were searching. Her heart dropped into her stomach as the horrifying reality of the situation crashed down upon her. Smugglers operating at this level do not simply abandon a shipment worth hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of dollars on the black market. Exotic animal traffickers are heavily armed, deeply ruthless, and highly organized. The driver of the crashed truck must have survived and called for an extraction team, or a trailing vehicle in the convoy had finally caught up. They were not coming to rescue the animals. They were coming to recover their illicit cargo and erase any evidence of their operation. And right now, the most valuable piece of that cargo was sitting in the passenger seat of her illuminated, highly visible police cruiser. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but years of police training forced it down, replacing the fear with a cold, calculated adrenaline. She was parked on the side of the road, her emergency lights flashing like a beacon in the night. She was a sitting duck. She had no backup, a dead radio, and only her standard-issue sidearm to defend against a coordinated group of desperate criminals. If they found her sitting in the car with the stolen gorilla, they would not hesitate to eliminate the only witness to their multi-million-dollar trafficking ring. She had only seconds to make a decision that would determine both of their fates. She reached forward and abruptly killed the engine of the cruiser. The sudden silence in the cabin was deafening. She switched off the headlights, the dashboard lights, and the flashing emergency bars on the roof. The world outside was instantly plunged into absolute, terrifying blackness, save for the approaching sweeping beams of the smuggler's truck making its way around the lower bend of the mountain. The temperature inside the vehicle immediately began to plummet as the heater died. She turned to the passenger seat. The baby gorilla, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere and the tension radiating from the officer, let out a soft, distressed whimper. Sarah quickly placed her hand over its small mouth, gently shushing the creature. She unzipped the front of her thick winter coat and carefully scooped the infant up, pressing its warm body directly against her chest, right over her beating heart. She quickly zipped the jacket back up, leaving only enough room for the baby to breathe, hiding it completely from view. The gorilla instinctively clung to her undershirt, its tiny hands gripping the fabric with surprising strength. She drew her service weapon from its holster, the cold metal heavy and reassuring in her grip. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, she quietly popped the handle of the driver's side door. The wind immediately howled into the cabin, biting at her face and freezing the moisture in her lungs. She slipped out of the vehicle, carefully pushing the door shut until it clicked softly, avoiding the loud slam that would instantly give away her position. She stepped off the asphalt and into the knee-deep snow of the forest edge, the darkness of the towering pine trees swallowing her whole, just as the blinding lights of the smuggler truck crested the hill and bathed her empty police cruiser in a harsh, unforgiving glare. The harsh beams of the modified off-road truck sliced through the swirling snow, casting long, distorted shadows across the abandoned police cruiser. Sarah crouched behind the thick, rough trunk of an ancient pine tree, her breathing shallow and controlled, every muscle in her body pulled taut like a wire. Inside her jacket, pressed firmly against her ribs, the baby gorilla remained absolutely motionless. It was a remarkable, primal instinct. The infant, though terrified and freezing, understood the silent language of the hunt. It knew they were prey, and it knew that making a sound meant death. Sarah felt its tiny, rapid heartbeat drumming wildly against her own, a fragile rhythm of life in the center of a frozen nightmare. Heavy boots crunched against the icy gravel of the road. Car doors slammed shutting with a sound like gunshot. Through a narrow gap in the branches, Sarah watched 3 figures approach her darkened vehicle. They were large men, bundled in heavy tactical winter gear, moving with a practiced, predatory efficiency. One of them held a massive, high-powered searchlight, sweeping the interior of the cruiser. Another gripped what looked like a customized semi-automatic rifle, the dark metal glinting in the harsh light. The third man, seemingly the leader, walked to the edge of the ravine, shining his own light down toward the wreckage of the transport truck. The wind carried snatches of their harsh voices. They were angry, desperate, and realizing quickly that their most valuable asset was missing, and the local law enforcement had found the scene. The leader shouted an order, pointing fiercely at the police car. The man with the searchlight began to inspect the ground around the driver's side door. Sarah closed her eyes, a wave of cold dread washing over her. She knew exactly what they were looking for, and she knew exactly what they would find. The snow was falling heavily, but it had not been enough time to cover her tracks. The deep, distinct indentations of her uniform boots led directly from the vehicle, off the asphalt, and straight into the dark, tangled edge of the forest. The beam of the searchlight hit the tree line, tracing the path of her footprints. The leader shouted another command, racking the bolt of his weapon with a terrifying metallic clack that echoed through the woods. They were coming into the trees. Sarah knew she could not stay hidden where she was. She had to move deeper into the mountain, away from the road, away from the men who would kill them both without a second thought. She tightened her grip around the infant in her coat, ensuring it was secure, and kept her service weapon raised. She began to back away slowly, placing each footstep with agonizing care, testing the snow for hidden branches that might snap and betray their position. The forest was an obstacle course of jagged rocks, hidden dips, and thick clinging underbrush. The darkness was nearly absolute, relieved only by the frantic, sweeping beams of the smugglers' flashlights piercing the woods behind her. Every step was a battle against the elements. The temperature was dropping fast, the cold seeping through her boots and numbing her toes. The wind whipped the falling snow into a blinding frenzy, stinging her eyes and making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Yet, amidst the freezing torment, a strange, profound warmth radiated from her chest. The baby gorilla, sensing her exertion and her fear, shifted slightly, wrapping its long arms tighter around her torso. It pressed its face into the curve of her neck beneath the coat collar. In that desperate flight through the dark, the lines between human and animal blurred into nothingness. They were simply 2 living beings, bound together by circumstance, relying entirely on each other to survive the night. Sarah drew strength from that fragile warmth. She was no longer just a police officer doing her job. She was a protector, a guardian of an innocent life that the world had tried to throw away. She navigated blindly toward a steep, rocky incline, hoping the treacherous terrain would slow their pursuers. The climb was brutal. Her boots slipped on hidden patches of ice, tearing the skin of her hands as she grabbed onto frozen roots and jagged stones to pull herself upward. Her lungs burned with every intake of the freezing mountain air. The extra weight of the baby and her heavy gear threatened to drag her down, but she forced herself to keep moving, driven by a raw, unyielding adrenaline. Below her, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The snapping of branches, the curses of the men slipping in the snow, the sweeping beams of light cutting through the canopy. They were tracking her relentlessly, driven by the lure of millions of dollars on the black market. As she reached the top of the incline, the terrain suddenly flattened out into a narrow, treacherous plateau. To her right, the mountain rose in a sheer, impassable wall of solid rock. To her left, the ground dropped away into a terrifying black abyss. She was forced to move along a narrow ledge, the wind howling violently across the exposed surface, threatening to blow her right off the edge. The snow was knee-deep here, hiding dangerous crevices. She paused for a fraction of a second, gasping for breath, her muscles screaming in protest. She unzipped her coat just an inch to check on the baby, The infant looked up at her, its amber eyes wide and terrified, ice crystals clinging to its dark hair. Sarah brushed a frozen tear from the creature's face, her heart aching. "Hold on just a little longer," she whispered into the raging wind. Suddenly, a beam of light swept across the ledge, illuminating Sarah in a blinding, terrifying glare. She froze, her blood turning to ice. One of the smugglers had managed to climb the incline faster than she anticipated, and was now standing at the edge of the plateau, less than 50 feet away. He shouted to the others, raising his rifle and aiming it squarely at the center of her chest. The blinding light made it impossible to see his face, but the threat was absolute and immediate. He ordered her to drop her weapon and hand over the coat. He knew exactly what she was hiding. This was the breaking point, the climax of a nightmare where there were no good options left. Sarah could not surrender the baby. If she handed the infant over, they would both be executed to silence the only witness. But if she tried to fire her service weapon, she would be outgunned and outmaneuvered in the blinding light. She stood on the edge of the precipice, the wind tearing at her clothes, the baby shivering against her heart. She tightened her grip on her pistol, her mind racing for a way out, a distraction, anything. The smuggler took a step forward onto the narrow ledge, his finger tightening on the trigger. But in his greed and his rush to secure the prize, he made a fatal miscalculation. The plateau was not solid rock. It was a sheet of thick, unstable black ice covered by a layer of fresh snow. As he shifted his weight to advance, his heavy tactical boot found absolutely no traction. His foot shot out from under him with violent speed. He let out a sharp cry of surprise as his balance vanished. His arms flailed wildly, the searchlight flying from his grasp and tumbling over the edge of the abyss, plunging the ledge back into darkness. His rifle discharged into the air with a deafening crack, the muzzle flash illuminating his terrified face for a split second before his body hit the unforgiving ice. The momentum carried him backward, sliding uncontrollably toward the steep drop-off. He scrambled desperately, his gloved hands clawing at the smooth ice, but there was nothing to grab. With a final, echoing scream that was swallowed by the howling wind, he slipped over the edge, disappearing into the black void below. The sudden silence that followed the gunshot was absolute, broken only by the raging storm. Sarah did not move. She kept her weapon raised, waiting for the other two men to rush up the incline. But the screams of their falling comrade and the sudden, terrifying realization of the deadly terrain must have broken their resolve. Down below, she heard the frantic shouting retreat. The heavy engine of the off-road truck roared back to life, the tires spinning furiously on the icy road as the remaining smugglers abandoned their cargo and fled the scene to save their own lives. Sarah collapsed onto her knees in the snow, the adrenaline suddenly draining from her body, leaving her violently trembling. She hugged her coat tightly, burying her face into the fabric, tears of sheer exhaustion and relief freezing on her cheeks. They had survived. Against all odds, the freezing weather and the ruthless criminals, they had survived. But the battle against the elements was not over. The storm was worsening, and her body temperature was dropping to critical levels. She dragged herself toward a small outcropping of rocks, finding a shallow, sheltered indentation that offered a minor reprieve from the wind. She huddled there, curling her body into a tight ball around the baby gorilla, sharing every ounce of remaining body heat. She closed her eyes, slipping into a dangerous, lethargic state as hypothermia began to set in. Hours passed. The world faded into a numb, white blur. Sarah was vaguely aware of the baby stroking her chin, a desperate attempt to keep her awake, to keep her alive just as she had kept it alive. Then, a new sound cut through the howl of the blizzard. It was not a truck engine. It was a rhythmic, heavy thumping from above. The sound grew louder, vibrating through the rocks. A massive beam of pure, brilliant light punched through the clouds, sweeping across the mountain peak. The storm had finally broken enough for the state police rescue chopper to deploy. The light swept over the rocks and stopped, blindingly bright, illuminating the huddled form of the officer and the tiny dark face peering out from her coat. The thunderous sound of the helicopter blades was the most beautiful music Sarah had ever heard. Backup had arrived. The rescue operation was swift and efficient. Paramedics descended on ropes, wrapping Sarah and the baby in thermal blankets and hoisting them to safety. When they finally reached the local hospital and specialized wildlife rescue teams arrived to take custody of the infant, the separation was agonizing. The baby gorilla clung to Sarah's hospital gown, shrieking and refusing to let go of the woman who had become its surrogate mother in the darkest hours of its life. It took coaxing and gentle sedation to finally part them, a moment that broke the hearts of everyone in the room. The story of the lone officer and the stolen gorilla made national headlines. The smugglers were eventually tracked down and arrested, dismantling a major exotic animal trafficking ring. The baby, named Quito, meaning precious one, was relocated to a world-class, highly secure wildlife sanctuary designed to rehabilitate victims of the black market trade. Years later, the trauma of that frozen night had faded, replaced by healing and growth. Sarah, now a decorated detective, walked along a viewing platform overlooking a massive, lush enclosure. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, a world away from the icy mountain pass. Down below, a magnificent, powerful silverback gorilla sat in the grass, gently eating bamboo. It was Quito. Sarah stepped close to the reinforced glass, her badge catching the sunlight. Quito stopped eating. He turned his massive head, his deep amber eyes locking onto the figure standing above. He rose to his feet, a towering display of primal strength, and slowly walked toward the glass. The crowd of visitors hushed, sensing a profound shift in the atmosphere. The massive silverback sat directly in front of Sarah, separated only by an inch of transparent material. He raised his massive leathery hand and pressed it flat against the glass. Sarah smiled, tears welling in her eyes, and raised her own hand, pressing it against the exact spot where Quito's palm rested. The gorilla let out a low, rumbling purr, the exact same sound of comfort he had made in the freezing cabin of her police cruiser all those years ago. He had not forgotten. In his vast, intelligent mind, he remembered the scent, the voice, and the heartbeat of the human who had shielded him from the storm. This incredible story proves that family is not defined by blood or even by species. It is defined by the profound acts of sacrifice, protection, and unconditional empathy that we show to one another in our most desperate hours. The wild is filled with these quiet miracles, moments where the barriers between humanity and the animal kingdom dissolve, revealing a shared, beating heart. If Quito and Sarah's unbreakable bond moved you today, please hit the like button, subscribe to Red Stoat, and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the emotional lives of the world's most incredible creatures. Click the video on your screen right now for another unbelievable true story of animal survival. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.